Anyone present in the general vicinity of online music communities in the past few years has likely seen a bit of praise for Car Seat Headrest's Twin Fantasy Face to Face. While some question whether this cult following over an hour and 11 minutes of an indie rock concept album is appropriate, I'd say that Car Seat Headrest has put forward every effort into making this album a masterpiece. In fact, Face to Face is a re-recording of an earlier version named Mirror to Mirror. Listening to both versions, it is clear that the band has grown in skill over the years while maintaining the same dedication to crafting a work of art in 2018 as they did in 2011. Over the course of this album, the band portrays the unique heartbreak of online relationships and the warped perceptions of loved ones through the use of figurative themes, such as the recurring beach motif which appears throughout the band's discography. This album does an incredible job at appealing to the chronically online teenage audience that the founder and vocalist of Car Seat Headrest was once part of. Twin Fantasy is one of 9 Car Seat Headrest albums that have been officially released on streaming services, and it's one of 15 albums from the band overall. Before forming Car Seat Headrest, Will Toledo created music under various artist names such as Nervous Young Men. When he decided it was time to leave the Nervous Young Men artist name in the past, Toledo took inspiration from his habit of recording vocals from the sanctuary of his car, and decided on the name Car Seat Headrest. Naturally, this practice resulted in more of a lo-fi sound, which wouldn't really phase out until the 2016 release, Teens of Denial. The first version of Twin Fantasy occurred 5 years before the band outgrew the fuzzy production quality, so while both versions are generally the same in structure, the difference in lyrics, quality, and sound create a definitive contrast between the two releases. The first track on the album, My Boy, conveys an easily digestible message, as the entire song consists of the lyrics, "My boy, we don't see each other much, it'll take some time, but somewhere down the line we won't be alone." And the entire song is just these 3 lines repeated 3 times with an instrumental that increases in potency with each repetition. This track operates as a sort of exposition to the album, explaining that while the narrator and the subject are currently separated, the narrator has hope that soon they will be together, as they are meant to be. The beginning of Twin Fantasy is full of hope for the future, and any concerns that the narrator has are rebuffed with ease. This brief opener is immediately contrasted by the second track, Beach Life and Death, a 13-minute song consisting of 3 sections in which Toledo describes various points in his life involving himself and the subject of the album. Part 1 discusses events from an uncertain past in which the narrator revisits experiences with the subject and worries that he has no direction in life without them. During this section, he repeats the question, "What should I do?" and receives replies in the form of basic instructions, "Eat breakfast, eat lunch, eat dinner, go to bed," which highlights the severity of his dependence on his lover. This is also the first point on the album in which references are made to past projects, the most recognizable of which being the verse regarding beach death, beach funeral, and polite young beachmen. These songs all originate from the album 3, which was presumably written when the events depicted on Twin Fantasy take place. Implementing a reference to this album on Beach Life and Death indicates the developments in Toledo's relationships and how the gravity of this relationship has affected his work. The second portion of this track discusses the relationship from a bitter, more present sense, in which the narrator worries he has lost the subject to someone better, someone the subject can be proud of. This makes the narrator worry that he has simply become another past mistake, that he is left now as an unwilling member of a group that the pair once renounced. The third and final part of Beach Life and Death depicts the narrator's view of the future from this point on, with the same lack of direction as the beginning. While he still hopes for a hint of attention from the subject, the narrator realizes that he must seek affection from another source. He begins to throw his cares away, desperate for some new form of identity, or some new individual to attach himself to, some change in the life he led while dedicated to the subject. He realizes this is futile, however, and begins to repeat the lines, "The ocean washed over your grave, the ocean washed open your grave." This imagery demonstrates the hopelessness of the narrator ever trying to bury his feelings toward the subject, as they will inevitably return again, like the rise and fall of the tide. Ironically enough, these lines will appear again later in the album, on the penultimate track, Famous Prophets, by which point the context is fully developed. Despite its length, Beach Life and Death hardly feels as if it drags on, and it uses every second available to develop the story of the narrator and the subject. The third track, Stop Smoking, We Love You, is generally regarded as the worst on Twin Fantasy, yet even at this position, I find it is both enjoyable and a necessary inclusion to the development of the album. Similarly to My Boy, the lyrical content is self-explanatory, solely consisting of the lines, "Stop smoking, we love you, and we don't want you to die." This song can be viewed as an intervention between the narrator and the subject, who clearly does not care for their personal health as highly as the narrator does by this point. Few discussions are more difficult than those in which one must plead to a loved one to stop engaging in self-destructive behaviors, yet the narrator makes sure his lover knows he cares for them. While it is unclear on this track whether the narrator's advice was heeded, the song provides a relaxed transition into the song that follows, Sober to Death. This fourth track provides further insight into how harmful the relationship depicted in Twin Fantasy truly is. Based on the contents of the song, the narrator appears to be his partner's punching bag, continually the target of complaints and criticisms. He encapsulates the central theme of the song in the line, "We were wrecks before we crashed into each other." The pair had always been unfit to survive a relationship. Regardless of how much he loves the subject, he is forced to acknowledge that the continuation of the pair's relationship will break each other down, and one way or another, they will eventually reach their inevitable destruction. The track ends with a callback to My Boy with the line, "Don't worry, you and me won't be alone no more," repeated with less of the instrumental present each time, until eventually it is only his voice and his reassurances, singing with no audience left. Following Sober to Death is one of my personal favorites, the only song on Twin Fantasy with an official music video, Nervous Young Inhumans. This track contains a polarizing combination of a synth-based instrumental, higher energy choruses, and a mellow, toned-down monologue. In Mirror to Mirror, Toledo uses this monologue to delve into the intentions behind his diction in the song, and how it connects to his feelings regarding his relationship. On Face to Face, however, the monologue focuses more on himself, the places that he's been, and how much time has passed since he's last connected with the subject. This is the first point on the album in which the concept of the Pain Star is introduced. The Pain Star is a reference to the comic Lame Sign 1 written by Cate Wurtz, the artist that Twin Fantasy was written about. Essentially, a pain star is a star that appears every several thousand years and will cause intense yet brief pain for whoever stumbles upon it. This theme can easily be connected to that of the portrayal of love on Twin Fantasy, as both are incredibly difficult to find yet can cause unbearable pain when discovered, especially in the narrator's reported experience. Another change between the two versions is seen in the chorus, as a young boy or man is described as galvanistic in the first, whereas in the second, the chorus focuses on how the subject has never lifted their voice nor their hands. This change could easily be another demonstration of how Toledo's viewpoint on the subject has changed in the time that passed since his first portrayal of the relationship, though it is just as likely that the alteration occurred after he discovered that galvanic is the more widely used term for the phenomenon. At this point in the album, the listener has been presented with a decent amount of concerns the narrator has toward the subject, while simultaneously feigning ignorance. As the partner was never physically abusive, they were the only one who truly understood the narrator. Following this nearly 3-minute-long monologue is the unconventionally spelled track Bodies. This is not the first Car Seat Headrest song in which intense anxiety is expressed while discussing a social dance, with the Nervous Young Man song I Wanna Sweat covering somewhat similar ground. Contrary to I Wanna Sweat, however, the narrator appears very subdued, reportedly keeping so quiet it's hard to tell that he's alive. The narrator is growing tired of having to put up with the subject's antics, and of feeling the need to speak with meaning behind his words. All he needs at this point in the album is the ability to hold his lover, in a period in which the fragility of their lives together is becoming increasingly apparent. While the pair is depicted as youthful, having to steal alcoholic beverages from parents or grandparents, the narrator manages to convince his dance partner to abandon all reason as he becomes increasingly conscious of their mortality, on the basis that their bodies could fall apart at any second. Regardless of the sense of immaturity and uncertainty that Bodies retains from Mirror to Mirror, it is generally regarded as one of the best tracks on the album, and for good reason. The seventh track, Cute Thing, is another display of how the singer has grown as a person since he first wrote the album. This song exhibits a significant amount of lyrical changes from the Mirror to Mirror version. For example, in the 2011 release, he asks God to give him Dan Behar's voice and John Entwistle's stage presence. However, in the 2018 release, his role models have changed to Frank Ocean and James Brown. As he grows as a person, so do his desires and ambitions as an artist. The third musician he references, John Linnell of They Might Be Giants, remains consistent between the releases, however, as a few lines from their song Anna Ang is interpolated into the bridge, and Will Toledo has to remain committed to the bit. As indicated by its name, Cute Thing is a bit of an affectionate song between lovers, and at one point, in the perspective of the subject, asking the narrator to come to Kansas to be with them. Several lyrics are written from this vantage point across the album, however this instance is probably the easiest to understand, as Will Toledo does not live in Kansas. As the last lighthearted song on the album, Cute Thing does an excellent job of closing the lighter portrayals of the relationship. By the 8th track, it is undeniable that the narrator's situation has taken a dark turn. The solemn and somber energy of High to Death greatly contrasts that of the handful of songs preceding it. This track incorporates countless allusions to earlier tracks on the album, and to various written works, the most obvious of which being the title, which is an allusion to the song High to Death. This reference indicates that the singer has undergone a significant change in the helplessness he feels toward the subject. In Sober to Death, he wishes the subject would return, or at least continue to hold on to their memory of them. However, by High to Death, he has given up all hope for their relationship's salvation. The song opens with the retelling of a poor experience Toledo had while under the influence, in which he feels entirely unable to function or even get up off the ground. No matter how badly he wishes to improve his circumstances, he is stuck blind and immobile. Along with references to this experience, lyrics from Stop Smoking are interpolated and warped to represent the narrator's last-ditch efforts to appear to the subject. The lyrics change to Keep Smoking, I Love You, but I Don't Want to Die, and it becomes increasingly evident that he has given up on trying to repair the relationship. Directly after this segment is an audio clip from Ray Bradbury's All Summer in a Day, a story in which the sun only appears once every 9 years. The segment Toledo plays occurs when the protagonist, played by Risa Malin, is locked into a room before she has a chance at witnessing the beauty of the sun.
It stopped.
Similarly to the little girl in the clip, the subject wants to be freed from William's fantasy. They no longer want to be victim to the narrator's misconstrued interpretation of who the subject is as a person. The narrator has only fallen in love with his own perception of the subject, practically creating an entirely new person, and he inevitably comes to the realization that his expectations will never be met. This idea is explained directly in the mirror-to-mirror Nervous Young Inhumans monologue, yet is barely developed across Face to Face, suggesting that he has fully outgrown his misconceptions over the years. The song closes with a voicemail between Hojin, Stella, Jung, and the Nevada Museum of Art, explaining the backstory behind the series of paintings included in the Twin Fantasy lyric booklet, known as The Lady. The somber tone of High to Death establishes all information necessary to transition into the penultimate track, Famous Prophets. Famous Prophets Stars is arguably one of the most altered tracks on Face to Face, with the replacement of entire verses and an entirely different breakdown and ending. While every second of this 16-minute song can be analyzed and decoded for hours, it is far easier on my limited storage space to give the most basic summary possible. At this point on the album, as the listener nears the conclusion, the narrator finally begins to fully conceptualize and accept the loss of his lover. This song displays the most evidence of maturity since the singer's initial reaction to his heartbreak, as he now views the time of his life in questions, asking if he wasted his time on a broken heart. In retrospect, it is incredibly tempting to minimize the severity of human emotions, especially in a case so catastrophic as the narrator's. Regardless of how hard he fights to keep this moment of weakness buried, however, it will always return to him as naturally as the ocean. At this point in the album, the lines from Beach Life and Death, the ocean washed over your grave, the ocean washed open your grave, make their return and are fully contextualized as he ricochets in and out of mourning for his love. Above all else, he wishes to return to a simpler time when he had never experienced this waxing and waning heartbreak. As the song nears its breaking point, so does the illusion the narrator has created toward the subject. The fantasy he envisioned has finally expired. After this epiphany is reached, and after a brief word about love spoken by Risa Malin, the most beautiful point on the album begins, in a section titled Pain Star. This section is an interpolation of the song Unfinished Pain Star from the project Distracta Membra, which was released after Mirror to Mirror and thus was not Famous Prophets' Minds. This section incorporates a distorted iteration of the lyrics in My Boy, indicating a change in tone toward the viewpoint of the subject. His entire worldview has disintegrated around him, and the singer begins to feel his sense of recognition slipping between his fingertips as he nears the end of the song and soon the end of the album. To close the album, the listener is met with the title track, Twin Fantasy, Those Boys. This song provides the most closure as to what happens between the narrator and the subject in regards to the story portrayed on the album. Through the examination of a few lyrical changes between Mirror to Mirror and Face to Face, such as the adjustment of verb tenses from present to past, it is clear that the singer can now view this period of his life in a renewed lens. He has, or is at least trying to move on, and now views himself in a completely different stage of life. To close the album, Toledo leaves the listener with the repetition of the phrase, "When I come back, you'll still be here." indicating that no matter how much time passes, he will always have a significant portion of his life dedicated to the subject.